Welcome to Green Money Matters, the podcast where your financial future meets the planet's well-being, bringing you the latest on climate issues and uncovering new and exciting investment opportunities that make a positive impact.
And I'm Chris Everitt, your guide to sustainable investing, ESG funds, and all things green. Each week, we'll explore the intersection of money and sustainability, showing you how investing wisely can create a greener world and grow your money.
So get ready to invest with a conscience and join the growing movement of individuals who are reshaping the financial landscape. Welcome to Green Money Matters.
This is Chris Everitt on Green Money Matters, and I'm joined today by Ben Vivari of Till Investors. Welcome, Ben.
Thank you, Chris, for having me.
Absolute pleasure. So Ben is an SRI counsellor, sustainable, responsible and impact investing, as I recollect. He's also a sustainable business advocate, and he's CEO, co-founder of Till Investors. But Ben, tell me a little bit about yourself. Tell me a little bit about Till.
Yeah, so, my background is in investment communications, working with a lot of large asset managers to help them, talk about their funds and their investment strategies and things like that. And, when the whole ESG thing really started taking off a couple of years ago, it became very evident very quickly that the traditional way of talking about investments was not doing the job. And so we started Till Investors to help people who were interested in investing sustainably, but who weren't really getting great explanations from those fund managers, to help them sort of sort out what is it that they should be looking for? How should they be evaluating these different funds? How can they take that language that isn't really all that great and make any sense out of it, and really help the end user make sense of the world of sustainable investing? Because, poor communications shouldn't get in the way of you investing in a way that you believe in.
No, absolutely it shouldn't, and it's great that they're doing that. So who are your typical investors, and what are they looking for?
So, we really look for the sweet spot for people who are what we will call everyday investors. They're saving for retirement, they're saving for a house, they're saving for college, they're saving for all these different things, but they don't necessarily have a financial advisor or have, a team of people doing evaluations of funds and putting together asset allocations for them. It's really, people who have enough money that they are ready to invest, or that they have invested for a while, but don't necessarily need to make it a job for themselves, right? Because, one of the things that we try to do is help people realize that your investments are a thing that you own, right? Own what you own is one of the things we like to say. And a lot of people just, who are really passionate about climate change or the environment or social justice are invested in fossil fuels or investing in companies that are, really bad for, diversity practices or whatever it is. And a lot of what we're trying to do is help people have that aha moment of, oh, wait a minute, I'm investing in the problem and not the solution. And that doesn't necessarily feel so great.
No, clearly not. No, I've had a little look through your website. Your fighting style quiz. I like that. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so one of the ways that we like to talk about sustainable investing is through your fighting style. And what we mean by that is that there's different ways that you can go about fighting for sustainability, right? So one of them is rewarding. You can reward the good companies. So you can find those companies that are, really moving towards the energy transition, might have really good diversity practices, might be really good in managing their supply chain overseas, and finding those companies and investing in them. Another way is avoiding, right? And we talk about this in terms of divesting, which is finding the bad companies and not investing in them. And so the most obvious and easiest ones are the fossil fuel companies, but there's lots of things that you can be upset about, and you get lots of things that you can avoid, and that's a popular style as well. And the third and final fighting style is the engaging strategy, and that is investing in companies, even those that you don't like necessarily, and pushing them to change, whether that's through engaging with them in meetings, whether that's through participating in shareholder proxy votes, right? Or, encouraging leadership to participate in various, NGOs and international groups and things like that, right? There's the thought that, as when you are an active owner and you are participating in your ownership, you can affect real change within some of these companies.
No, that's interesting. So, as sustainable investors or, climate conscious investors, how much impact can we have? To what extent can we change companies' behavior?
Well, there's power in numbers. Right. So for most of the people that we're talking about, yes, it is true. No, you are not going to go invest in Chevron and then get a meeting with the Chevron CEO and tell him, no, you really need to do things differently. Right. But you can invest with a fund manager who might be able to have that meeting with Chevron. So when we talk about sustainable investing as an individual, we are more interested in aligning ourselves with people who do have that power, right? It's like a political party. You're gonna know your one singular vote as an individual might not necessarily tip the scales, but you are going to join a movement of like-minded individuals, and with that power consolidated, you might actually tip the scales, right? And so that's what we're really looking for as sustainable investors at our level. It's find the people who you agree with or who fight for things that you care about and align yourself with them.
Okay, brilliant. Do you actually get your investors, physically or remotely together to instigate change, or is it lots of individuals simply advocating in their own individual way?
It's a lot of individuals right now. I mean, we really want to be your first step, right? And then, we want to help you understand that these groups are out there, right? That these fund managers are out there. But first of all, we definitely don't want to endorse one particular fund over another. We want that to be your choice. And we want to sort of send you on the path, but we want you to get there and be on that path yourself.
Okay, now I understand. Now, amongst other things, you've written a white paper, 3 reasons to become a sustainable investor, and the one big reason you'll be glad you did. Can you give us a sneak preview of what those 3 big reasons are, and the one big one that you mentioned?
So the 3 big reasons that you want to become a sustainable investor, from our mind, and there might be 10 big reasons, but the 3 biggest ones for us is, number 1, it's possible, right? It's accessible to just about everybody. If you are able to invest in a mutual fund, you can be investing in a sustainable mutual fund. And that wasn't the case 10, 15, 20 years ago. And for a lot of people, it wasn't necessarily the case 5 years ago. This is something that's really exploded over the last couple of years. But now it's a lot easier, and it's something that you can do. The second one is that the biggest concern that people have, and there are some very smart people who still have this concern, is they believe that sustainable investing is not going to provide you with returns compared to traditional investing. And there have been a lot of studies on this, and they all say different things, right? What I can tell you is that if you invest sustainably, however you do it, yes, your returns are going to be different from a regular, traditional investment, but you can't say with definity whether it's going to be better or worse, right? And in fact, if you could definitely prove that sustainable investing was a money loser, you would see a lot of people pouring money into unsustainable investing, right? There would be plenty of funds out there that are, fossil fuel heavy and bad guy heavy, and everybody would be pushing all their money into it because that's where all the money is, right? The reality is that there's so many different ways to invest sustainably that it's disingenuous to talk about performance with a broad brush, right? Every strategy is different. If you're going to be rewarding the good companies, if you're going to be divesting from the bad companies, they all have different returns. The logic that I subscribe to is that, and this is borne out in a couple of studies, is that sustainable investing is looking at the long-term game, right? And the longer your time horizon, the better sustainable investing has shown to do. And that's great for the everyday investor, because the everyday investor is the long-term investor. We're investing for our retirements way down the line. We're investing in our kids' college or whatever it is. So we've got long time horizons. This is not a game for day traders. And the reason that we think that this is a long-term game is that what we're doing is we're trying to reduce risk, right? So there is a risk in the fossil fuel world that regulations and climate change and all these things are going to happen. And in the long term, they are going to be less valuable, right? That doesn't mean that they're going to have no ups over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years, right? If you think that you can time the market, and I can tell you can't, but if you think you can time the market and you can buy when the fossil fuels are going up and sell them when they're going down, more power to you. But if you're looking at the 20-year time horizon and thinking, well, our fossil fuel company is going to be more or less valuable in 20 years, you're going to think less, right? And so, the same is true with say, paying your employees a fair wage, right? If you are currently paying your employees a fair wage, you do not have much risk of a government regulation coming along and affecting how much you can pay your employees. If you're paying your employees less than a fair wage, there is a long-term risk that eventually some regulation is going to come along and you will have a challenge to your business model and your cost of labor will go up, right? So these are sort of long-term, big picture things, and it's a theory that I believe in quite a bit. I do think that if you are investing sustainably, what you are doing is you're hedging against those long-term big picture risks. And I do think that in those long-term time horizons, you're going to do better than someone who isn't considering those risks.
I guess what you're saying is that funds normally go through their traditional financial analyses. And then on top of that, you've got risk analyses in terms of environmental risk, social risk, and governance risk. So in other words, those funds are effectively better risk analyzed.
Yes, that is certainly my belief. And, it plays out, there are studies out there that show the importance of, say, a diverse board of directors, right? That, in the long term, these boards are better at managing risk. They're better long-term bets. So it's not just doing it for diversity's sake or doing it for environment's sake. There is sound, reasoned, studies looking at these sorts of things and showing the value of incorporating them into your investment process.
And then the third big reason to become a sustainable investor.
And then the third big reason, so another thing that people are very concerned about when they start thinking about sustainable investing, and rightfully, is greenwashing, right? The idea that a company is going to greenwash their environmental qualifications, and then beyond that, that a mutual fund provider is going to greenwash their investment process. They're going to tell you that they're incorporating all of these, environmental concerns and diversity concerns into their process, but then they don't really actually do it. And it's a very legit concern, but the good news is you can overcome it pretty easily because the companies that do it are not very good at it. It's really a matter of looking under the hood and asking two pretty simple and straightforward questions. So the first question you ask is, do they say what they do? They might slap an ESG label on there, or they might slap a sustainable label on there. But if you look under the hood, are they saying, well, here's what we mean by sustainable, or here's what we mean by ESG, or here's how we incorporate these different risks into our investment process? If they don't tell you, you are under no obligation to believe them, and you can move yourself right on to the next fund. So in our book, we actually run through a couple of real-life funds and say, here's where we're looking. We're going to look in the fact sheet. We might look at their top holdings. We might even look at that big, scary prospectus, right, and see what they say in there. We're not teaching you to be financial masterminds, but we're teaching you how to ask some simple questions to make sure and giving you the confidence to say, oh, yeah, I can look at this, and if it doesn't smell right, I don't need to invest in it. So that first question of do they say what they do? And the second question is, do they do what they say? Can you look at their investments and say, oh, well, that makes sense because they do X, Y, and Z, and so their top holding is Tesla or is MasterCard or Apple or whatever it is. Is it clear that they're actually following their process? And when you're asking those questions, not only are you rooting out greenwashing, but you're becoming an educated consumer. You're becoming an educated investor. You're understanding more about what you're investing in. And in my mind, whether you're a sustainable investor or just a regular investor, that's an important thing to do.
No, I wholeheartedly agree. And I don't think anybody expects the ordinary investor to be an expert. But yeah, I think we're all very supportive of saying, look, do your own research, take responsibility as well, or share responsibility. So those are really good points. Question on ESG. An ESG score gives you a fair indication of where a company sits and its climate friendliness, let's say. I think a lot of people still interpret an ESG score as simply saying, it just means not fossil fuels. What do you say to that?
So, one of the things that we've been watching over these last couple of years is the advancement of data and standards. And it's something that we have been really encouraged in watching over the last couple of years, that there are a couple of really effective international standards setters, and companies are really paying attention to them and reporting on them. Even though they are not obligated to from any sort of legal requirement, it's been really fascinating to see, 5 years ago, nobody was putting out a sustainability report. And now, just about every Fortune 500 company has some sort of sustainability report with some big old data tables in the back, right? And they're asking in their reporting to these standards, right? And so the standards are really thinking about it. So when you look at a fossil fuel company versus Nike versus Apple again, those reports are going to be very different because they're very different types of companies, right? Like Nike, you're going to see all sorts of questions about their supply chain, right? They're going to be asking where they're sourcing the materials, where their factories, are they up to snuff on, how they're treating their workers and paying their workers and slave labor and all of those things, right? Whereas Apple's going to be much more about data security and privacy and, being a good corporate citizen and things of that nature. So, ESG scores are their own ball of wax, but in terms of the actual investment analysis going on and the corporate citizenship analysis, it's actually getting better every year, but it is really taking a look at the behavior of these companies and what's called material. What's the material issue for this company? So, for example, if you are an accounting firm or if you are a big bank, your carbon emissions are not all that important. Well, let's be honest. Yes, you can have nice buildings and LEED buildings and all that, but what's really important as a bank is that you're managing risk well, right? And that you're providing services to those who might be underserved, right? And so those are the questions we are going to ask about as a bank. Whereas if you are a energy company, a fossil fuel company, what matters more than anything in terms of your corporate citizenship is your emissions. And so we're going to ask very important questions about those types of companies. So I'm really actually very encouraged watching the industry develop over the last couple of years, that they are getting much better at asking the relevant questions of these companies.
Ben, you have written a book, an ESG starter kit for everyday investors with Purcell.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about the motivation for writing this.
Yeah, so we wanted to make it digestible and easy. We did not want to write a big, huge textbook. There are a couple of big, huge textbooks out there, and Godspeed to them. We wanted this to be something where you could sit down for an hour or two and get the confidence that you need to actually go forth and make a sustainable investment, right? To say, okay, now I get it. Now I understand what to look for and what to look out for. I understand the risks involved. I understand why I would want to do this in the first place. And I'm going to, fire up my internet browser and click a couple clicks, right? And we feel like it's so important for those people who do not have advisors, in some cases, for people who do have advisors that are giving them bad advice, to arm themselves with that information and get that confidence, because ultimately we believe that sustainable investing is really important, right? That aligning your investments with your values is something that you will appreciate. And I don't just say that as a theory. I invest sustainably, right? My funds are all tied up in mutual funds that reflect my values and what I care about in the world. And it feels good, which is not something that you often feel about your investments, where usually it feels scary. Usually it feels risky, right? And it's a nicer way to look at the markets without just thinking about it in terms of how much money you have, but also thinking about how you're invested and what that money is doing in the world.
Okay, brilliant. You're into election year. What is going to be the impact on ESG funds from the anti-woke lobby And also, what are you anticipating in terms of any regulatory changes that could come up?
So a lot of the anti-woke people who were very upset about ESG investing in general have really, it's been an incredible self-own in that they decided to get all up in arms about this and all very mad about it. And, the states that have actually had anti-ESG legislation come through are now costing themselves in the millions of dollars, right? Because they're not able to access some of the cheaper funds, some of the better performing funds, and they are just costing themselves a ton of money. In terms of what this means from a national regulatory environment, it's a little scary to think of what might happen, but I do think that what the anti-woke regulators are trying to do is trying to reduce choice, trying to reduce consumer choice. I am hopeful that when seen under that lens, that will be problematic and there won't be that much momentum for it. I think on the other hand, if it swings the other way and we keep the current administration in power, I think it's going to be incremental. I think it's a political touch point. I think it's a hot button issue, but I think there is some possibility that we will get some small victories. But my ultimate hope is that it has very little effect on the people that we care about the most, which is the individual investors, that you will still have that consumer choice, that you will still be able to access these funds should you choose to, and that, what's happening in the macro environment won't necessarily affect your micro decisions all that much.
Okay, understood. Thank you. As a sustainable finance expert, how do you see the intersection of technology and environmental impact?
So the AI thing to me, I think, is a bit of a bubble right now. I don't see it that much when it comes to sustainable investing. One of the things that I think is important as a sustainable investor is that you're not necessarily chasing the trends, right? You're definitely focused on the long term. You're focused on solid fundamentals. You're focused on managing risk. And right now, AI is a high risk environment with lots of crazy valuations and lots of seed money going into it. And to me, I don't think it's going to have that much effect on sustainable investing. But certainly technologies that we think are going to help drive that energy transition, I think are very interesting to sustainable investors. And it's not by happenstance that a lot of these sustainable mutual funds are very heavy on the technology sectors because there's very little to be controversial there. Google is not a huge carbon emitter. Facebook does not have a huge supply chain in third world countries, and so if you're doing that avoiding fighting style and really screening out the bad actors, what you're going to be left with is often overweights in technology companies. And I think that makes a lot of sense to me.
So what are the industries, sectors, and companies that are going to benefit from climate conscious investors? Which ones do you see as having the wind in their sails right now?
Well, certainly the biggest one is right now is around renewable energies. And there are lots of good companies out there that are renewable energy producers, and they all have some wind at their backs and some wind in their wind turbines. But also some of it is just a matter of doing regular due diligence on an investment. Like, you cannot evaluate a auto manufacturer right now without looking at their EV capabilities and their EV performance. And so if you're looking at Ford or GM or any of these companies, if they are doing well in their EV development, they are going to be a better investment for you, right? So certainly you can look at specific industries that are only keyed in on green products and services, but really just about every company right now has something where they need to be paying attention to these issues.
Yeah, I mean, the EV, electric vehicle car industry is an interesting one. How do you respond to the suggestion that electric vehicles is the right answer to the wrong question?
I think it is an answer to a question, right? But it's one piece of the puzzle. You know, if the question is, are you going to buy a gas car or an electric vehicle? Then yes, the electric vehicle is the right answer. Is the question, are you going to buy an electric vehicle, or are we going to make a massive investment in mass transit and clean trains and all that? I'd say, yeah, that's a different answer. And maybe that is the macro correct answer. But again, it comes down to you as an individual and what your choice is, right? And micro decision right now is gas or electric. And you're going to choose, hopefully, you are going to choose electric. So I don't think it is the right answer to the wrong question. I think it is the right answer to the question that's in front of many people.
Okay,
but the other thing that I'll say about EVs, so Tesla actually is a fascinating case study from the standpoint of a sustainable investor, right? Because you've got a company that makes electric vehicles, and that's great. Tick in the good side of the ledger. But they have a really poor supply chain. They have very poor environmental practices from a manufacturing standpoint. They have serious challenges from a social standpoint and diversity and all of those things. And from a governance standpoint, you can't find a more questionably governed leadership team than Elon Musk and his little board of directors there. When you asked me earlier about ESG scores, like how do you put a score on that, right? It's a real challenge. So, the thought of EVs by themselves is one thing, but you also need to take a look at the broader company and the context in which they're being made and how that whole process is being run. And that, to me, is the right question.
Yeah, no, brilliant. And does Till give that sort of insight into those sort of stories behind the story?
Absolutely. So we have a number of examples in our book of, different industries and companies who might be doing well, might have been doing poorly, where some of those long-term risks really came back to bite a couple of industries, and others where they managed them properly and they're reaping the benefits, right? I think it's very important to talk about this with examples and putting all of these theories into context and into real-life stories.
Now, Nordia came up with some statistics or facts a few years ago, and they've been sort of regurgitated in various ways ever since. The essence of it was that if you invest sustainably, they can have a factor of something like 20 or 27 times everything else you do sustainably put together. So taking fewer flights, taking more trains, taking fewer or shorter showers, all the other things that we perhaps try and do. And that the impact of sustainably investing would have, 20, 27 times a greater impact than all those put together. What do you say to that? Do you agree with it?
Oh, I mean, that sounds very impressive. I would like to know the methodology that they used to put that together. I think it's hard, again, because there's so many different ways to invest sustainably that it's hard, paint a broad brush like that, right? But it certainly sounds very impressive. But to me, the most important lesson from that is if you're not doing it, it's a huge blind spot. Yes, it matters. Yes, if you recycle, it matters. But yes, if you walk versus drive, that matters. This matters too, right? And if you think it is worth your time to buy an electric vehicle or to take the train instead of driving or to recycle that can of Coke, then you should also be putting that same amount of energy into making sure you're investing sustainably. And the roadblocks are only confidence and willpower. And that's what we're trying to do at Till, is to try to give you that confidence, try to push you in this direction. Because whether it's 27 times more important or 2 times more important or just as important, it's important, right? Full stop. And that's what we're really hoping to help people understand and act on.
That's brilliant. Yeah, excellent. Now, you have a global perspective on impact investing. Could you perhaps share some insights into the challenges and opportunities you've encountered in different regions? And how does your approach change or adapt to different cultural, economic, social factors?
So obviously, sustainability is a global issue and a global phenomenon. And while we're based here in the United States, we're investing in companies that are operating internationally. And, what happens on your side of the pond in the EU is going to have a lot of effect on what happens here in the States and what happens in Asia and all of that. And I think a lot of what we tell people when you're looking at these global issues is, you need to be aware of what you're investing in, right? So if you have a company that is operating in China, that's going to say something. I mean, it was fascinating watching when the Russia-Ukraine thing happened, all of these companies that pulled out of Russia. And that was a real concern. That's a great example of a long-term concern. If you are operating in Russia, there is a risk that will become politically impossible. And you might have been making good money in 2000 and 2021 operating in Russia, but it became politically impossible. And a lot of companies had to leave, right? And so that was a long-term risk that came to root for a lot of those companies, and a lot of their revenues came down quite a bit because of that. So, you need to look at the geopolitical situation as another part of your investment risk profile. Or even better, frankly, is investing with a mutual fund provider who does that for you, who's going to say, I'm going to look at who's operating in China and who might be potentially using, slave labor, or who's operating in Russia or wherever it is, and use that as part of my risk profile when looking at this company, right? That's really what you're looking for, a fund manager who you can trust to make those kind of decisions.
Yeah, brilliant. Are you optimistic, Ben, that everything we do, is it going to do the right thing for us? Are we going to get there?
I don't know that I'm optimistic or pessimistic about that. What I am is motivated, right? I think that you've got to pull on all the levers that you have in front of you. And if you don't, then I am pessimistic. And if you do, then I am more optimistic. I think you have to play the hand that you're dealt, but you need to play it in the best way possible, right? It's an election year. It could be really bad, right? But that doesn't mean that I am going to change my strategy of doing the best I can to help, the best I can to point things in the right direction, right? I am probably pessimistic by nature, but motivated is more than anything.
Okay, that's excellent. Glad you're on our side. That's great.
There you go.
Yeah. Looking ahead, what do you see as the big challenges and opportunities in the field of impact investing, and how can we all work together to address these sorts of issues?
Yeah, so looking ahead, I think that this is something actually that I'm optimistic about. So there. I think that, we're going to continue getting better at getting organized. I think that the regulations are going to come, particularly in the EU, and that's going to have effect on all the companies across the world who operate there. I think the standards are going to get better. I think the data is going to get better. I think the reporting is going to get better. It's going to take time, and there's going to be roadblocks, and there's going to be challenges, and there's going to be cheaters, and there's going to be greenwashers and all of those things. But when I look at the options today compared to 5 years ago, it's a sea change. It is just incredibly more achievable, incredibly more actionable for everyday investors. And I think that is going to continue to happen.
Excellent. Yeah, I agree. I think the world is moving in the right direction. The question is whether it's moving fast enough and what we can do to encourage it and set a proverbial light under it to make it happen a lot faster than it's doing already.
Absolutely.
Ben Vivari of Till Investors, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Thank you for your optimism, your contribution. I think Till Investors is doing an excellent thing, and appreciate you joining me today and sharing your wisdom with us. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having me on. It was a great discussion. I had a lot of fun, and hopefully we'll do it again sometime.
Excellent, Ben. Looking forward to that. Thank you. And that wraps up another episode of Green Money Matters. We hope you're feeling inspired to take your investments to new green heights. Remember, It's not just about the bottom line anymore. By aligning your investments with sustainable values, you have the power to shape a better future for generations to come.
If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe to Green Money Matters on your favorite podcast platform and never miss an opportunity to grow your wealth sustainably. Together, let's make money matter for the planet.
And don't forget to leave us a review. We really would love to hear your thoughts or ideas for future episodes. Drop me a line by email at chris@greenmoneymatters.com.
Stay tuned for our next exciting episode, where we'll explore groundbreaking investment opportunities and unveil the secrets of successful sustainable investors. Until then, remember, green money matters. Because investing in our planet's future is the smartest choice you can make. Thanks for joining us.